Welcome to Shadow Flight Tech. Don't forget to like and subscribe. The infantry tank Mark II, best known as the Matilda, was a British infantry tank of the Second World War. The design began as the A-12 specification in 1936, as a gun-armed counterpart to the first British infantry tank, the machine-gun-armed, two-man A-11 infantry tank Mark I. The Mark I was also known as Matilda, and the larger A-12 was initially known as the Matilda II or Matilda Senior. The Mark I was abandoned in 1940, and from then on, the A-12 was almost always known simply as the Matilda. Of the previous A-7, only 3 prototypes were built by Vickers, requested internally for potential Army or other contracts. They were built from 1929 to 1933, incorporated elements which largely influenced the A-9 cruiser Mk.II, notably the turret, and the A-12 Matilda, including the drivetrain, suspension, and part of the armor design, but also later the A-14, A-17, and ultimately the Valentine. The third and last prototype, A-7E3, 1933-37, probably had the biggest influence on the Matilda II, as it incorporated a twin-diesel AEC-C1 and a QF-3 PDR, 47mm or 1.85-in, anti-tank gun. However, it was too lightly protected to serve as an infantry tank. The Matilda Mark II, or rather Matilda II, to avoid confusion with the sub-Mark versions, or Matilda Senior, was a 60,000 pounds machine, armed with the new QF 40mm, 1.57-in, gun, one of the many derivatives of the license-built Boffers, which had an excellent rate of fire. The caliber seemed sufficient against most tanks of the time, generally equipped with a 37 or 47mm, 1.46 to 1.85-in, gun. The hydraulically powered 3-man fully traversing turret was cast in one solid piece of hardened steel, almost cylindrical, slightly sloped, and tall enough to accommodate the main gun and a coaxial machine gun, as well as the commander. The gun elevation was -15 + 20 degrees. It was only fed with anti-tank rounds. The lack of HE ammunition was somewhat compensated by the machine gun. But emphasis was put on armor. And indeed, this compensated easily for all its drawbacks during the war. With a 78mm, 3.07-in, frontal glacis and turret, far beyond any tank produced at the time, and even late into the war, the Matilda II was thought immune to most anti-tank guns, and naturally other tanks as well. This tank became legendary precisely for this rare quality. By comparison, the contemporary Panzer III and IV armor was 30mm, 1.18-in, strong, and the French B1, the most heavily armored tank on the continent, only 60mm, 2.36-in. The glacis was completed by thinner, but sloped nose plates, in a design largely influenced by the Christie tanks. The sides were 65 to 70mm, 2.56 to 2.76-in, and the rear glacis 55mm, 2.17-in, strong. The turret roof, hull roof and engine deck were all 20mm, 0.79-in, thick. The weight of such armor conditioned other features in the design, starting with a twin-diesel AEC engine arrangement and Wilson epicyclic pre-selector gearbox, 6-speed transmission, with a Rackham clutch for steering. It also imposed the numerous double-wheel bogies, with paired bell cranks with a common coil spring suspension, a rather classical solution based on the old Vickers medium C design, which was intended to distribute the sheer mass of steel with moderate ground pressure, while sacrificing speed. By logical conclusion, its overall performances were quite limited, only infantry pace, which was precisely the task given to the A-12 type, infantry support. However, the most troublesome piece of equipment was the paired, double-decker, bus engines, linked to a common shaft, a solution which proved complicated to maintain, with many redundancies which often prevented movement when one of the two engines was damaged or broken down. The very first model, a pre-series, was equipped with several features which will disappear with the production Mark I and Mark II. First, the suspension had 3 return rollers. They were replaced later by track skids, to ease production and maintenance. The turret was equipped, on the right, with a set of 3 smoke grenade launchers, in fact modified Lee-Enfield mechanisms. On the turret left side took place a set of leather belts, to suspend a large protecting, rolled canvas. Later, these were replaced by a simpler metal tubular structure. When the war broke out in September 1939, only 2 Matilda IIS were serviceable. The other deliveries were pressed into service quickly after training. The same year, another order was placed to Ruston and Hornsby, and in 1940, to John Fowler and Company of Leeds, and later, in 1941–42, to London, Midland and Scottish Railway, Harland and Wolff, Belfast, the famous shipbuilder of the Titanic, and, eventually, the North British Locomotive Company in Scotland. Production ended in August 1943 after a total of 2,987 units. It was a relatively costly tanks, and difficult to manufacture, requiring some special skills. When war broke out, only 2 Matilda II of the pre-series type were recently put in active service. They were soon joined by 20 others, passing the year in drilling exercises, before being shipped to France, where they came to serve with the 7th RTR, part of the British Expeditionary Force, BEF, Armoured Division. They represented a minority of this unit/S strength, the bulk of infantry tanks companies being taken by the older A-11 Matilda, minor, Matilda I. However, their armor was superior to the formidable French B-1 BIS, and they proved it during a single battle, at Arras. The entire Matilda II force available was committed during the hopeless attack of Arras, in the afternoon of May 21, 1940, and after some success due to the lack of German efficient response, they were ultimately terminated by a handful of German 88mm, 3.46 in, Flak 18 and 105mm, 4.13 in, field guns. Rommel had remembered how these AA guns were used in Spain years before. The surviving units withdrew from the field and were abandoned along with hundreds of trucks and light vehicles at Dunkirk. They were sabotaged, but the Germans captured 2 of them, later repaired for tests. When the war enveloped North Africa, the Matilda II truly became legendary, being nicknamed the Queen of the Desert by its crews. The Matilda II/S armor was still a powerful argument in all tank-to-tank engagements against Italian armor and AT guns, during the early stage of the war, Operation Compass, late 1940. After that it proved itself time and time again against the DAK XVTH Panzer Division, still largely equipped with light Panzer IIS and early models of the Panzer III and IV, using inadequate guns. But Rommel/S imaginative ambush tactics using AT guns proved a serious threat for the Matilda II, hampered by its slow speed and a somewhat troublesome, overheating engine, and troublesome steering under the harsh conditions of this specific theatre of war. The already famous 7th RTR, reborn in Britain, fully re-equipped with Mark IIS, took part both in the late 1940 campaign, and still ruled the battlefield until late 1941. Battle records included the conquest of Libya, seizing of Tobruk and Bardia, and later, Operation Battleaxe. The Germans used well-placed AA batteries of 88mm, 3.46 in, guns with full efficiency against the Matilda. No less than 64 were lost during a single day of attack. Such a heavy toll raised questions about Matilda/S fighting capabilities, but, nevertheless, it still proved efficient where opposing forces had nothing to respond with. The PAK-36, PAK-41, PAK-97A38 and SPZB-41 were all but useless. But the rapid-firing, accurate 88mm, 3.46 in, combined with skilled crews, flat ground with good visibility and the Matilda/S slow motion, all conspired to condemn large-scale frontal attacks, using the Matilda. Another factor played for its demise. Like the Crusader, it was armed with a 1939 standard AT gun, good against 20 to 30mm, 0.79 to 1.18 in, armor, but not against the upgraded versions of the Panzer III and IV, which came in Africa in late 1941. However, with their limitations well understood by the British command, they were once more successful during Operation Crusader, especially the 1st and 32nd Army Tank Brigades, which were pivotal in the battle. By mid-1942, the Germans had devised efficient infantry tactics using the PAK-38, and the long-barrel 50mm, 1.97 in, version of the Panzer III, Ausf J, which could deal with the Matilda. One solution was to upgrade the main gun, but with a turret ring of only 1.37 meters, 4.49 feet, no superior gun could be mounted without a major overhaul of the entire hull. Such a project was attempted in 1942, but after a single prototype was tested, the production was dropped for more modern late-generation cruiser tanks. In Africa, the Matilda was gradually phased out by the Valentine. Damaged and worn-out Matildas were retired and replaced by other models. Some were shipped to less threatening theaters, like in South and Eastern Africa, for operations against Italian Somaliland and Eritrea, in 1941. They were part of the 4th Royal Tank Regiment, taking part in the Battle of Keren and all other operations in this sector. But the mountainous terrain prevented any efficient large-scale use. Others were shipped to Greece, during the Balkan Campaign, Crete and Malta, to prevent any German landing there. Matildas took part in the Battle of Gazala, summer 1942, and the First Battle of El Alamein, with further losses, and, just like the Crusaders, which were their opposite, fast, lightly armored, low silhouette, many were converted for other uses. It was no surprise that, when the Second Battle of El Alamein began in October 1942, around 25 Matilda Scorpions, equipped with mine flail, were the only ones used in the front line. When the M3 Lee and M4 Sherman, faster, and equipped with much potent guns, came in numbers, the remaining Matildas were shipped back to Britain, some for training, others as a reserve for further conversions. Thank you for listening to Flight Tech News. Don't forget to like and subscribe.